I'm Tracy. I am the Education Community Manager at the Node Foundation. I am a diplomat, baker, rock climber, web engineer, motorcyclist. I've worn many hats. I've been a conference organizer, a baker by trade, an addictions program coordinator, and a restaurant manager, though this is not the exhaustive list. But what I like to demonstrate by that is just how much I love learning. I love digging into all of that. And whether it's code or researching intersections of my interests, I really nerd out on what it means to learn, how each person must approach it. To learn for fun, for improvement, to career transition, to get hired, to get promoted, or found a company. It's piqued my interest for a long time, so it's a pleasure for me to address this head on in my work. So learning to code is in itself becoming a new common language. Programming in one form or another is essential across all sectors of the economy, and a strong skill for those seeking advancement. Programming ability provides upwards mobility like few other opportunities. We're seeing far less graduates with computer science degrees, no university degree at all, a liberal arts background, code schools, self-paced learning. When we're looking at improving Learning Node, it's a beautiful variety of people segmented by different learning styles, geographical and cultural differences, and even socioeconomic status. Last winter, the Node Foundation expanded its annual survey to encompass and unravel who is and how programmers are learning Node. We'll explore the Node user, a global landscape attempting to learn Node even when English is not their spoken language of choice. Let's explore the quality work across mediums that's available despite our experience level and how there's no single answer for learning Node. And a special note before I dig in further, I just want to say that the data I'm about to show you is majoritively from our 2017 Node user survey and anecdotes that I've collected from the community. We ran this survey in the fall in English as well as in Chinese with the help of Joy Chiang translating for us to encourage wider participation. Our research results were also analyzed by Research Collaborative, an independent research consultancy. So, who is learning Node? The typical Node user resides in the US, is age 31, college educated, and has around 6 years of professional development experience. Note that doesn't mean Node-specific experience. Users span a range of job titles, with front-end and back-end engineers most common. More than half work in organizations with fewer than 100 employees. This is the little nugget to keep in mind. The typical Node coder has been using Node for just over 2 years. Node users spend about half of their professional time using Node, mostly for developing web apps. Keep this in mind as sort of the status quo of the Node developer, but we have enough representation in groups outside of this pretty stereotypical developer persona that a segmented approach is needed to address all the differences, which often run rather deep. Part of that is we speak different languages, and that is not a metaphor. 95% of our users learn Node in English, but to 45% of our users, that's their non-native language. Think about that for a moment. Nearly half of our users have had to learn a programming platform and also know another spoken language to get there. Users take advantage of many different resources for learning, so providing a broad mix of tools that accommodate multiple languages where feasible is and will be important. Documentation, free online courses, and tutorial videos are among the most valued educational resources, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little, so we'll dive into that a little further through. So then why do we learn Node? Why did we start? So there's funny reasons people will give, or rather sort of unfun reasons that people trying to find humor in. PHP was making me very sad, but I do want to note that this is a quote. It's not me knocking PHP. This was one person who was very sad. Another comment was that work made me. But then there's also the really useful reasons, which I've heard time and time again. One person said, I looked at the diversity of Node packages years ago. I was impressed. There was a package for everything, from controlling robotics to helper packages like Lodash and Async.js. Another person said, we just needed a platform for quickly developing web apps at low cost that would present data from our data warehouse. Sounds familiar, right? It's a very common thing for us. Or I already knew JavaScript. I already had some experience with JS, and I wanted to learn with minimum time consumption. Just getting to write JavaScript, the event-driven paradigm is great. Being able to not context switch is a luxury JavaScript engineers had not really been able to enjoy on the scale until Node came along and became more widely adopted. A rather favorite one is write once use in client and server. More people I've heard, big fan of Socket.io. I don't really need to think I need to sell y'all on this though. And finally, not a very scientific comment, but one I'm always delighted to hear, and I hear it fairly frequently. It's fun. Node rocks. So how'd they learn it? How are we learning Node? Yeah, I know. Docs and Stack Overflow. I think this is one of the reasons people constantly ask for more structured resources. It's the 1-2 combo punch. Stack Overflow is really useful, but it doesn't necessarily teach best practices that have been adopted by people leading in Node code culture. I don't see a lot of working group contributors answering questions in Stack Overflow. However, I am really grateful for the people who are patiently in there answering questions because they are doing a whole heck of a lot of it. This also isn't a great exposure first experience with the Node community because as far as I can tell, it's not really that present and cohesive. And especially poor behavior can't really be held accountable if we don't know that it happened, especially when it occurs outside of the places that we regularly commute. Maybe we should be showing that a little more love. And as for docs, when I say documentation, this isn't just Node API docs. A lot of comments given on the best docs were those of ecosystem packages. That many of our especially prolific authors had good documentation and made it really easy to learn from the changes that folks were seeing in GitHub as these packages evolved. Overall, we know that more than half of our users don't think learning Node is easy. And that comes from a wide range of backgrounds and experience levels. Remember that our average user has been programming for pay for 6 years. Behind Stack Overflow, and docs, tutorials and online courses such as Code School, Egghead.io, Udemy, You Don't Know JS, Code Academy, Coursera, Pluralsight, and a lot of other massive open online courses were the main informal education source. However, there was an exception to learning styles in one region overall. One-on-one tutoring is more widely used in China than anywhere else, and it's the overwhelming primary learning tool there. So let's take a look at a few of the other resources that our wide range of users approach Node with. Community. So our community in one form or another has really been a solid standpoint for people to be introduced to Node and continue. Node School, a series of workshops built to be walked through in person with mentors and peers cheering them on. Node School's topics cover a wide range and have been community collaborated software effort far before other projects had this breadth and depth. NodeBots. It's a monthly, yearly workshop for hardware and JavaScript enthusiasts of all skill levels to play with Node and robots. This group has been huge in encouraging more people to look at IoT and Node. It's also been a gateway for people to try Node and carry it over into their main work. A lot of folks said Node meetups. So there are new meetups popping up daily. They tend to be a set of talks from your local Node devs and a super way to find folks to regularly throw questions to about what you're working on. You should try looking for them in your town. Node Girls and Node Together. Node Girls currently operates in London and multiple cities in Australia, and these events prioritize underrepresented groups in learning Node. Node Together was a series of workshops that circled the globe last year, teaching how to get a web app up with Node in a day while covering web concepts, making no assumption about experience level. Another one that I thought was really fantastic, it was great to see so many people had felt the value of it, was NodeUp. And operating since 2011, NodeUp is a podcast that's hosted quite a range of Node developers. Recommendations and discussion from this show has kept the curiosity alive for many a Node developer. And also IRC and Slack. Our online chat communities were some of the earliest central community in Node. Between Freenode and Slack, we've got a number of groups that really did help and do help one another with the simple but not necessarily easy messes we can get ourselves into. Check out nodeirc.info to find more on most of those. So then we can get into more of the general internet help. That can be anything from Googling. So usually what that entails is you Google something and then you're going to find a blog. Then we also have cnodejs.org. And what cnode is the Chinese Node community. And it's visually similar to Reddit, but it's all conversations about Node code. And it's got 700,000 active users. It's a sight to behold, no pun intended. If you don't read Chinese, browser translators are pretty great now, and it's really neat to interact there. I recommend translating anything you write to Chinese to get more responses. And then we have also got awesome tools like Exorcism.io. Code schools. So there's a number of full stack JavaScript schools now. Grace Hopper Academy, Full Stack Academy, Code Fellows, and Hack Reactor, to name a few. But this brings up another point. Most universities are not teaching Node. Not yet, and especially not in the US. I'm trying to find them now and encourage more instructors to adopt it, but let me know if you are. Email me, please. And then there's the classic book learning. We've got everything from Node Up and Running, Node.js in Action, Node the Right Way, Streams Handbook, HTTP, the Definitive Guide. There's a lot of books that we can look to learn, and they're constantly coming out. We also have books that have been around for a long time, like the ones that I've listed, and that's a disclaimer. So some of these books have dated themselves a bit with how fast Node has been changing. It's really hard, especially if they're in print form. But others are keeping quite up to date. So what I'm telling you is this is how people learned Node prior. And also, if you'll notice, these are almost exclusively all in English. So for our more experienced programmers, but not in Node, knowing the fundamentals and patterns of other languages was a big help to those transitioning over from other languages. And having been practiced in that, many learned by reading the source code of docs and ecosystem modules. As said, a number of authors were really great about documentation. And then there's diving in, trial and error. One Node coder survey remarked, one of the biggest learning tools for me has been writing a ton of horrible, non-performant JavaScript that crashed and burned. The more code I wrote, the more I learned what not to do. And another part of that experience is debugging tools we're consuming, but not necessarily contributing back to yet. Another anecdote was that a person learned a ton through subscribing to the Node issue tracker, reading through the code, lurking on conversations, and I felt that that was, being able to observe folks open sourcing on this scale was a really incredible way to approach things, and I'd love to encourage more people to do that. Mentors. So knowingly or unknowingly, mentors inspire and keep people in Node. Working alongside people who are contributing to the language and happy to share their knowledge has been really powerful for a number of people writing Node. It can be intimidating to ask this of people, but it's worth pushing through. My mentor pushed what I thought I'd be interested in areas of Node by his infectious excitement about developments of the project. And the one that always makes me giggle, and this happens fairly common when I ask for input on how people are learning, is self-taught. But that's tough to say because that's not really a thing. People read source, and reading source is still standing on the shoulder of giants. Somebody had to write it, and hopefully they wrote it in a way that it's comprehensible, and even more so if they have documentation. It takes whole communities to build a Node programmer, even if that community lives in the ether of the internet or a far-off server. And it's also important to point out again that where one hangs their hat in the world makes a difference in interest for learning. There's considerable interest in a range of resources among Latin American users in particular. And on the other hand, Chinese users don't care so much about a wide range of resources, but they're concerned about the availability and quality of the learning tools. So that's what we're learning. But what are the barriers to learning? Like, what was so difficult about why we're learning Node? Uh, and while not necessarily broken, relatively few users describe the process of learning Node as easy. Access and quality of resources is an issue in some topic areas, especially including managing Node for production and security. Users in China, new users, and those in smaller companies are among the most likely to complain about accessibility or the quality of resources. Now next, keep in mind these are opinions shared, not necessarily my own experience. So tools I'm used to from programming in other languages or that someone told me would be really helpful. The first was there was no real IDE when I started learning. IDEs that support JavaScript now are far better than years back. I was not a fan personally when I started writing Node, but the plugins now have created a level of support difficult to ignore. This is especially useful for those who have transitioned from other languages that had excellent IDEs. And that can be everything from WebStorm to Komodo to Eclipse, and even Sublime Text and Atom at this point have plugins that are so hefty that you're getting some really awesome auto-completion as well. And then there's the debugger issue. So I got this comment a surprising amount of time, and it was that no real debuggers existed at the time that I started programming Node. Yeah, I mean, it can be pretty difficult to debug code without a decent debugger. Who'd have thought? So discovery and quality of resources help a new Node.jser out. It can be really hard to find resources. I just ended up using Stack Overflow, and this is sort of, where we run into this again, like why Stack Overflow and documentation is the place that everybody ends up. Finding something that's useful and up to date is a struggle. Another was some of the API docs are very substandard, and again, this is a comment that I've heard many a time. I felt this pain when I first started. They just weren't entry-level docs. If JavaScript alone was a prerequisite, it'd be fine, but a lot of assumptions have been written into the docs about programming constructs you would have been exposed to in other languages. And another is just that it's difficult to find good examples of production-ready Node apps and services. I think this is oftentimes what we also see when it comes to conference content. Everybody wants more of that. They want to know how to actually get it done and keep it stable. But what, this is a great comment for barriers to Node. Maybe JavaScript is the problem. This great comment was, good part is Node, the bad part is JavaScript. And to others, it's just the idea that event-driven programming kind of breaks their brain. It's a very different style of programming for some coming from other languages. JavaScript allows you to do all kinds of weird stuff and tricks and hacks, which doesn't really help beginners who usually need more structure. And learning JavaScript isn't easy, and that's a lot of people admitted that. And Node, as part of that, is sort of caught up in it. Scope and async programming especially. Or maybe it really is Node. A great anecdote. The learning curve is really shallow and then gets super steep. Since you're building things from the ground up, there are times when you aren't quite sure how to get from point A to B. And there are times when I solved a problem only to find out that there was already a solution. The curse of discovery in Node. I built my own load balancer in Node before I found out there was built-in functionality for that. But on the flip side, there isn't anything I've wanted to do that hasn't been possible. Another challenge of Node is keeping up with the changing trends in the Node community. Callbacks to promises, streams, observables. And furthermore, even stepping back from the technical content, some remark that the community itself is what stands in the way. Flame wars in the community can sometimes catch bystanders in the crossfire when they just want to learn and have working code. Or maybe a lot of our Node coders only writing Node for about 50% of their day job have to context switch. Not everyone gets the pure JavaScript full stack luxury. I use it alongside other languages, one person said, so I can get rusty at it pretty quickly. And lastly, a number of people wrote and continue to answer that their biggest barrier is time. This is people waxing poetic to the external struggle of FOMO in our fast-paced ecosystem. The struggle is real. So speaking of trying to keep up with all of that, what if you also want to get pull requests accepted? Learning isn't just for beginners. We're paid to learn every day. We have to improve to push our work forward. What if you need a fix in Node itself? Learning to contribute. This is a work in progress for us as a project. Node users have not typically contributed to open source networks in the past, and there's a reluctance to get involved, in large part because of lack of time or experience, but also because of feeling intimidated or not knowing how. And even if interest in providing technical contributions might be limited, there does seem to be potential for folks wanting a mentoring program and also volunteering, especially in the subgroups such as our longer-term users. And this is where community can really shine. Code and Learn, Node to Do, and community organizers running How to Open Source nights. This is really powerful because it can accelerate your learning, provide you unknowing mentors, and help with retaining folks because they feel a sense of community and agency to affect change. From a project standpoint, that also gives the benefit of creating more sustainability within Node. So how can we make it better? Opportunities exist for improving the Node experience. Overall, as we've said, just 45% of users say Node was easy to learn. So we've got a lot of room for growth there. And many people said that they were neutral on it. So that's not positive. While the availability and quality of resources for learning JavaScript are adequate, resources around managing Node and prod and security are still greatly lacking. The low positives and high negatives there were especially concerning. Node for front-end engineering and async programming are also weak spots with fewer than half given top ratings for availability and quality. So again, there's a lot of room for resources to be created in that sphere. Discovery is such an eternal curse to the Node community. It's incredibly difficult for newcomers when they know what they don't know, but they don't know where to go to get help in that quest. The main resources users rely on when learning a new language are docs and Stack Overflow. Having more contributors answering questions on Node.js/help in IRC and on Stack Overflow is an awesome way to learn how to mentor and ensure our community is adopting best practices. We can set coders up for success. Another request that I've seen, and I've had conversations with folks about, is the idea of providing a VM with the full tool stack in an IDE. And that's really powerful, especially being able to hand over something to someone and just say, here you go. You don't have to spend an hour trying to figure out the minimal setup for Node. And videos. Video tutorials, conference talks, those are huge. They get big viewership, and anytime you can update those online, it's very helpful to people. We're seeing even the movement in Twitch where folks are starting to teach Node or run through hardware, people like Seuss Hinton, who have these really incredible ability to speak about this in a way that people can also be asking questions during the sessions, and that's exciting. An official getting started guide for Node development is constantly in question and requested, and that's so that we can easily have findable places on our official medium, such as nodejs.org, for people to get started. If it's in a place where people understand that it's an official source, they're going to trust it. Another is a collection of simple examples for various use cases and how someone might fall into bad practices. Callbacks is a great one here. Best practices, security-specific examples, people want this content. Another thing that we can do is address community problems, because not all problems are technical. Moderation, consideration around deprecation, more communication. And making documentation more entry-level and beginner-friendly. A huge part of that is being welcoming to the rest of the world and reminding us that half of our users don't speak English. So that's translation. We need a lot of translation. So let's recap. Node is not widely seen as easy to learn, in part because so many have had to learn it in their non-native language. While resources for JavaScript and general Node programming seem to be adequate, there are areas that are lacking, such as Node and prod and security. Multiple learning tools will be critical to accommodate different preferences based on region, job, or area of focus. And users rely on many different learning resources, but docs, free online courses, and tutorial videos top the wish list for further development. So how can you accelerate your learning? Go to events. People are the answer. Local ones are often free. Collaboration summits, Code and Learn, Node to Do, Node Schools, Node Bots. These are awesome. If you get the opportunity, try to come to conferences. There are scholarships and travel assistance often available as well, especially if you're speaking. And if you don't see this listed on a website, email an organizer. Most organizers are really friendly and they're happy to answer questions. It never hurts to ask for what you need. So all you have to do to learn Node is to run through a number of tutorials, be patient spelunking through Stack Overflow and our docs, speak English, maybe attend a code school, read lots of books, write even more non-performant crash and burn code, and work your way through coding and architecting bigger and bigger Node projects. Simple, right? This is not okay. There's a lot to fix. Help is needed, and you can help. One of the most enjoyable parts of working in education for Node is the space it's created for more people to help contribute. Lots of new to engaging in the community people with great ideas and time to help. If you program, project manage, design, teach, write, there's things that you can do. Check out github.com/nodejs/education to file issues on what you'd like to see, and brownie points if you can help make that happen. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. I want to say a huge thanks to a number of people for helping with this. Greg Wallace is a colleague of mine who helped get this data together for the Node survey. I also had a number of folks who contributed to the anecdotes that I was collecting, and that includes Audrey Van Hoot, Todd Kennedy, Paul Johnson, Tierney Siren, and I also want to say thanks for the icons that I was able to use as part of that by RocketCon. So, thanks, everyone.